That sentence rang out, cold and final like a verdict. Sophia Carter stood frozen, clutching the first-class ticket her husband had personally booked for her, a fully valid ticket. But to flight attendant Camilla, the simple linen dress and neatly tied-back hair were enough reason to question her very presence. No diamond ring, no designer handbag, no air of entitlement. Just an old silver watch on her wrist, a gift from a man she once served coffee to on a flight 10 years ago. A man who now ran an entire airline empire. No one in first class believed she belonged there. Some chuckled under their breath. Some gave her pitiful glances. The rest didn't even try to hide their contempt. What none of them knew was that in just a few minutes, the cabin doors would open, and the man walking in would be her husband, a billionaire, and the owner of the very airline they were flying on, and what happened next would leave the entire first-class cabin in stunned silence. Sophia Carter, 35 years old, had once been a highly respected flight attendant, known among her colleagues for her grace and calm presence. Today, she wore no name tag on her chest, and she no longer had to bow or serve drinks. But deep down, she still carried the spirit of someone who had spent her youth learning how to treat every passenger with dignity, whether they wore tailored suits or faded jeans. After leaving her job, Sophia dedicated herself to charity work. She personally raised over $2 million to open a shelter and support center for homeless children in the Eastlake neighborhood. And as a quiet celebration of her efforts, Nathan, her husband, had booked her a first-class seat on a flight to the Monte Sereno Beach Resort. "You deserve a little luxury," he said as he kissed her goodbye at the airport. "We'll meet at the resort, but this time, let me welcome you as an honored guest." Sophia had hesitated. Ever since marrying Nathan, she had chosen to live simply, carefully, avoiding the spotlight that came with being the billionaire's wife. She'd turned down interviews, refused to attend her husband's corporate galas, and never once used his name to open doors for herself. Today, she arrived at the airport alone, wearing a linen dress she had sewn herself last year, and the same worn low-heeled shoes she wore to community events. She never imagined that choosing simplicity would make her a target, that it would make people question her, look down on her, in the very place that used to feel like home. And what she didn't expect was that this would be the day her dignity would be trampled, only to be restored, not by the power of a name, but by a truth no one could deny. Sophia gently held up the ticket. "I have a first-class seat," she said, her voice calm yet firm with dignity. Camilla, the lead flight attendant, didn't need more than a glance. She took the ticket between just two fingers, as if it was something foreign or suspicious. "It seems there was a system error." Camilla raised an eyebrow, her eyes gliding from Sophia's bare wrist, no bracelet, no watch to her unbranded linen dress. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in the back." From behind, a man in an Armani suit let out a scoff. "This happens all the time. Coach must be overflowing again." A couple dressed head to toe in Prada whispered under their breath, eyes locked onto Sophia's modest outfit. An older woman, adorned with a string of sapphire pearls, shook her head and muttered, "I thought this airline screened passengers better than this." Sophia's cheeks flushed with heat. She didn't move, but her palms had begun to sweat. "My ticket is absolutely valid," she said, her voice unwavering. "My husband bought it personally." A soft chuckle broke the tension. A woman wearing a diamond necklace the size of a grape spoke in a voice as sweet as sugarcane but laced with mockery. "Everyone says that when they're trying to get upgraded." "What's next? You're going to say your husband is the CEO?" Laughter rippled through the cabin like waves. No one was pretending anymore. To them, Sophia was just another dreamer, trying to slip into a world that clearly wasn't hers. Camila gave a polite, rehearsed smile. "I'll double-check the system. In the meantime, please wait near the boarding area. That might be more appropriate." At that moment, Sophia could have said it. She could have dropped the name Nathan Carter. Just one sentence. "My husband owns this airline." That alone would have silenced the entire cabin. Heads would have bowed. Apologies would have flooded in. But she didn't say a word. Not out of pride, but because of something far greater. If respect has to be demanded by title, then maybe it was never real to begin with. Sophia remained standing beside seat 2A, the very seat Nathan had picked out for her weeks in advance. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from a quiet, seeping disappointment. Disappointment in the very profession she once took so much pride in, now reduced to coldness, judgment, and suspicion. A cabin supervisor, a man in a tilted cap and a crisply pressed uniform, approached. His face wore professionalism, but his eyes avoided hers. He spoke in a flat, rehearsed tone. "Ma'am, there seems to be a booking issue in the system. I'm going to have to ask you to step off the aircraft so we can verify your information." The words weren't loud, but they rang through the cabin like an alarm bell. A man typing on his laptop froze. A woman in seat 1C subtly raised her phone to record. Camilla stood upright, hands clasped in front of her, a look on her face that came dangerously close to triumph. Sophia took a deep breath. She remembered the old in-flight safety briefings back when she was the one handling special passenger issues. She had been trained to smile under pressure, to de-escalate without ever diminishing her own worth. But today, she was the one being labeled the issue. "I'm not leaving," she said quietly, yet firmly. "My ticket is valid. I have every right to sit in the seat that was paid for." Someone nearby muttered, "Come on, some of us have meetings to get to." Another passenger snapped, "We're already delayed." What makes her so special? Then came a word. No one knew who said it, but it floated through the air loud enough to pierce. "She's just a nobody." She heard it, and she would remember it. The supervisor's eyes softened, as if he was starting to realize this wasn't just a simple system glitch anymore. But still, he pressed on. "Ma'am, if we can't verify your ticket in the system, we'll have to ask you to step off the aircraft to confirm with ground operations." Sophia gave a slight nod, her gaze steady, never lowering. She had once taught aviation trainees how to protect a passenger's dignity. Today, she was protecting her own. As she slowly stepped toward the exit, the airplane door suddenly clicked open. A gust of cold air swept through the cabin. Those who had been waiting for the scene to end had no idea the lead actor had just walked in. Click. The latch wasn't loud, but it was enough to make the entire cabin hold its breath. The door opened, slowly. And then he appeared. Nathan Carter, 6'2", broad shoulders, calm, collected presence. A deep navy Tom Ford suit hugged his frame as he walked with quiet confidence. No name badge, no entourage, just a gaze so steady it hushed the entire room. A few passengers instinctively sat up straighter. One man, holding a coffee cup, suddenly trembled. Nathan's eyes swept across the cabin slowly, calmly, as if assessing a space that, in truth, belonged to him. Then he saw her. Sophia stood near the cabin door, her face calm, but her eyes carried quiet pain. Next to her stood Camilla, frozen, her professional smile beginning to twist at the corners. "Is there a problem with my wife's seat?" Nathan's voice rang out. It was low, warm, tinged with a soft southern drawl, but the weight it carried felt like a verdict handed down from a judge. Camilla stood stunned. The cabin supervisor instinctively stepped half a pace back. The entire first-class cabin fell silent. A few jaws dropped. Some passengers covered their mouths. Others, quietly, began recording. Wife Camilla echoed, her voice barely audible, as if her brain refused to process what her ears had just heard. Nathan walked forward, each step purposeful, steady, like a man who had just left a boardroom meeting and stopped by only to restore order. He stood beside Sophia, gently placing his hand on the small of her back, a subtle gesture, but filled with protection and unmistakable affirmation. "Her name is Sophia Carter. She's my wife, and she was booked rightfully for seat 2A. Do you have any other questions?" Camilla opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. The same passengers who had just mocked Sophia now stared down at their laps. The man in the designer suit suddenly found his shoes more fascinating than anything else in the world. The cabin supervisor stammered, We didn't know, Mr. Carter." "Didn't know," Nathan repeated. His voice remained soft, but his eyes were razor sharp. "Then, what exactly were you checking? Whether she had a ticket or whether she just didn't look like someone who belonged here?" The entire cabin froze. No one needed to answer. The silence did it for them. Nathan gently pressed his hand against Sophia's back, not saying much, but saying everything she needed to feel. "You don't have to stand alone anymore." Then he turned to the supervisor, his voice still low and even, but his gaze cut through the air like a blade. "I'll ask again. What exactly were you verifying? The barcode on the ticket, or the fact that my wife didn't meet the silent little standards you've decided she had to match just to sit in seat 2A? Camilla's hands began to tremble. Her polished, polite smile had vanished. The folder she was holding began to curl under her fingers, her nails digging into the cardboard edge. Nathan gave a small nod, then slowly looked around the cabin, where eyes now darted away like guilty children caught in the act. Then he spoke louder this time, not angry, but crystal clear. Each word etched in the air like it was carved in stone. "Before she was my wife, Sophia was one of the finest flight attendants this airline has ever had. She once saved a passenger from a stroke mid-flight, not by chance, but because of her experience, her sharp instincts, and her composure under pressure. And this very airline awarded her a Medal of Excellence, which still hangs at headquarters to this day. A soft sound came from behind the subtle clink of a gold ring slipping off someone's finger as she unconsciously twisted it in shame. Nathan's voice softened, but the truth behind his words only deepened. She has never bragged, never asked for special treatment. She has never needed anyone to recognize her title in order to be treated with basic human respect. Nathan looked directly at Camilla. His eyes were no longer angry, just disappointed. You called someone just anyone because of how they dressed, because they weren't wearing a designer label. Then tell me, if I hadn't shown up today, what would have happened? Would you have removed my wife from this flight? Camilla didn't respond. She just stood there like a mannequin whose battery had been pulled. The supervisor stepped in, trying to salvage what he could. Mr. Carter, this was a misunderstanding. We truly didn't know she was my wife. Nathan interrupted, gently but firmly. Or a human being who deserves basic respect. That question wasn't just for the supervisor. It was for everyone in that cabin, everyone who had silently judged her for a dress without a label. Now, not a single person could look at Sophia without feeling ashamed. First class went quiet, not the silence of admiration, but the silence of discomfort. The kind that creeps in when judgment has been exposed and there's nowhere left to hide. Nathan held Camilla's gaze for a few seconds longer, then slowly turned to the supervisor. I was late because I wanted to surprise my wife. Nathan said, but it seems I arrived right on time. His voice remained calm, but every word cut with the precision of a finely sharpened blade. The supervisor lowered his head. Camilla now stared blankly at her leather shoes, the same shoes that had confidently walked past so many passengers she silently deemed unworthy. Nathan reached for his phone, typed a short message, and looked directly at Camilla. I just emailed our executive board. Starting tomorrow, every employee at Stellar Skyways will begin mandatory retraining on anti-discrimination, on human dignity, and on what truly defines class. She swallowed hard. Sweat began to bead at her hairline, melting the flawless foundation she had so carefully applied. And you, Camilla, Nathan added, will be the first to attend that training. Mandatory. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to threaten. The words echoed like a quiet alarm bell ringing through the cabin, waking up a room full of people who had forgotten how to see. Someone whispered under their breath, "Serves her right." Another passenger nodded slowly, but didn't dare say it aloud. Nathan turned to the supervisor, who was now gripping his cap like a shield. You know that open position for Director of Customer Experience, Nathan said, his voice calm but firm. I believe I've found the right person for it. The supervisor blinked. You mean? Nathan smiled, gently squeezing Sophia's hand. Yes, if she accepts. Sophia Carter will take the role. A ripple of shock moved through the cabin, but this time it wasn't disdain, it was awe. The same woman they had dismissed just 10 minutes ago, now being invited to take a seat at the table where real decisions are made, where culture is shaped, where voices like hers matter. Camilla could barely stay on her feet. The The gold badge on her uniform, once a symbol of status and control, now felt unbearably heavy, pressing down on the weight of judgment she would have to carry for a long time. And Sophia said nothing, but her eyes no longer carried pain. They carried clarity, awakening. The air in the cabin had shifted. The soft cabin lights were still glowing. The faint scent of champagne still lingered. But the arrogance that once filled the space had vanished like smoke after a summer storm. Nathan turned to face the entire cabin. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need a microphone. And yet every word carried, crisp and undeniable, like a quiet declaration of what should have always been true. I apologize for the delay, and more importantly, I apologize if any of you have ever felt that you weren't enough to be treated with basic respect on this airline. Several eyes welled up. The woman with the sapphire necklace lowered her gaze. The man in the Armani suit who had once scoffed was now adjusting his tie, avoiding Nathan's eyes. Nathan paused for a moment, and then he continued. Starting next week, Nathan continued, Stellar Skyways will implement mandatory training for every employee from ground staff to flight crew on one foundational principle. Respect should never require conditions. No more assumptions based on clothing, skin color, wealth, or style. He turned to Sophia, then his eyes soft, but filled with quiet resolve. And Sophia, if you accept the role of Director of Customer Experience, you'll have full authority to rebuild this airline service culture from the ground up. Camila felt a chill run through her body. Everything she once held as standard was now being rewritten, and not by some cold, distant CEO, but by a woman she had dismissed without a second thought. Sophia still hadn't spoken, not because she was unsure, but because she was fully feeling the weight of what change truly meant. Nathan turned back to face the cabin one last time, his voice deep, calm, and sincere. Champagne will be served on the house for the remainder of the flight, as a sincere apology from both myself and this airline. And Nathan paused for just a moment, then added, just loud enough for Camilla and a few nearby passengers to hear, and make sure my wife receives the care she deserves. Your career may depend on it. Camila nodded silently. She didn't dare speak. The power dynamic had shifted completely. She, who once wielded standards like a weapon to exclude others, was now learning a lesson no manual had ever taught. True worth is not measured by boarding passes or seat numbers. It's measured by how we treat people when we think they have nothing to offer us. The flight continued in an unusual hush. No more side conversations, no more smirks, no more whispered judgments, just the quiet hum of the trolley wheels and a stillness filled with reflection. Camila moved silently down the aisle, pouring champagne for each passenger. Each time she neared Sophia, she dipped her head, not because she had to, but because shame finally weighed more than pride. Sophia didn't say a word. She simply accepted her glass of juice, still refusing alcohol, as she always had, and turned her gaze toward the window. She was thinking about the years she had devoted to aviation, about why she chose this path in the first place, not for the salary, but for the quiet joy of making strangers feel welcome. And now, as the judgment in a few glances had sparked a shift across an entire airline. Something inside her glowed. When the plane landed, Sophia and Nathan were escorted through the VIP exit. No lines, no crowds. Monte Sereno Resort wasn't far. In their ocean-front suite, they sat together on the balcony, glasses of red wine catching the last light of day. "You always show up at the perfect moment," Sophia said with a playful smile, though her eyes held something deeper. Nathan chuckled, setting his glass down and taking her hand. "I wasn't planning to. The idea was to meet you at the resort and surprise you with a gift, but I guess fate decided that gift needed to happen mid-flight." Sophia tilted her head, amused. A gift. Nathan looked at her for a long moment, then spoke softly. "The director of customer experience role. I started thinking about it after that charity drive you organized. But after today, I'm not thinking anymore. I know. You're the right person." Sophia didn't respond right away. Not out of surprise, but out of emotion. Nathan continued, "I'm not offering it to you because you're my wife. I'm offering it because no one understands what it means to be underestimated and still choose kindness better than you." She reached up to touch her wrist, the old silver watch, the first gift he ever gave her back when she still wore a uniform, flat shoes, and was always the last to step off the plane. Back then, she didn't know she'd one day marry a billionaire. But she did know. She wanted to become someone who never judged others by what they wore or how they looked. Later, after a quiet dinner on the balcony, Sophia stepped down onto the beach. Behind her, the lights from the resort glowed like soft golden fireflies in the dark. In front of her, an endless black ocean. So still. It felt like the world was holding its breath. The sound of the waves brushing against the sand reminded her of those late-night flights when she was the last to check the cabin, tighten each seatbelt, fold every blanket with care. No one knew her name then, but she knew theirs, every passenger with a dietary need, every elderly flyer afraid of turbulence, every child traveling alone. She was the person who made others feel like they belonged, even if they were only there for a few hours. And now, in a strange twist of fate, she had been made to feel like she didn't belong because of a simple dress, a bare hairstyle. "I used to be part of this world," Sophia whispered to herself. Not the world of first-class champagne and designer bags, but the one where silent workers kept strangers safe, comfortable, and treated with dignity. And because she had lived in that world, she knew exactly where the cracks had begun to show. She remembered the look in a trainee's eyes years ago, the day a passenger yelled at her for serving too slowly, and no one stepped in to defend her. She remembered the worried look on the elderly passenger's face when he was accidentally assigned a middle seat, even though he had specifically chosen the window to avoid feeling closed in. She remembered the silent passengers, the ones who never said a word, but whose eyes asked for a glass of water, for just a small moment of kindness. She didn't want to return to the industry for power or recognition. She wanted to return because there were still so many like her people who had been overlooked, pushed aside, and still chose to keep going, still chose to be kind. Nathan appeared beside her. He didn't speak. He simply placed a jacket gently over her shoulders. She slipped it on, then looked up at him. "Do you remember," she asked, "when you once asked why I didn't stay in aviation?" He nodded. "Because I was afraid of becoming someone I wouldn't recognize." She smiled. "But now I know I can go back, not to become like them, but to change how we see one another from the inside out." They sat down together on a stone bench, just a few steps from the edge of the water. The waves whispered softly, like they were retelling old flights, and the lives Sophia had once passed by but never forgotten. Nathan remained silent. He knew she was remembering. And sometimes, silence is the kindest gift you can offer someone you love. Sophia stared out into the distance, her eyes reflecting the moonlight dancing on the sea. "There was a time," she said softly, "when I feared the title Nathan Carter's wife more than I feared my very first day on the job." Nathan turned to her, surprised. She looked at him, not with blame, but with gentle truth. "Because every time someone found out who I was, I stopped being me. I became an image, a standard, something that had to be flawless." She lowered her gaze, slipping off the silver watch from her wrist, and held it in her palm like something sacred. "I chose silence today, not because I was weak, but because I didn't want being your wife to become my ticket to being treated like a human being. I wanted to stand there," Sophia whispered, "to let them doubt me, look down on me, dismiss me, and see if I still had the strength to hold on to who I am." Nathan squeezed her hand tighter. Sophia looked up, her eyes glistening under the silver light of the moon. "And when you walked in, not as a powerful man, but as someone who saw me, truly saw me, I knew I'd made the right choice. If I accept the new role, it won't be because I'm your wife. It'll be because I, Sophia Carter, know what it feels like to be pushed aside, and I won't let anyone else go through that without someone to stand up for them." Nathan nodded. He didn't say "I'm proud of you," because he knew she didn't need that. What she needed was to be trusted, not for who she was connected to, but for who she was. Sophia slipped the watch back onto her wrist, but this time not as a symbol of the past, but as a promise to the future. "Time is a gift," she said quietly, "and I'll use mine to change how people are seen." Flight attendants no longer asked for a passenger's ticket class before offering a smile. A single mother with 3 children was served drinks before business class. An elderly man in a worn jacket, wearing a veteran's pin, was invited to board first. And standing quietly in the center of the cabin, no longer in her old uniform, but still carrying that same calm presence, was Sophia Carter, the airline's new director of customer experience. She didn't arrive with a grand introduction. No red carpet, no rehearsed compliments. Just her walking down the aisle, watching every face, noticing every gesture, and jotting notes into a simple brown leather notebook. Camila, after completing her mandatory training, had been reassigned to a domestic route. She was still a bit awkward, but this time, when she bowed her head to greet a passenger, there was something new in her eyes, humility. A young flight attendant turned to Sophia and asked, "Aren't you supposed to be in your office?" Sophia smiled. "Culture isn't built in boardrooms," Sophia said, still smiling. "It's felt in the way someone is welcomed the moment they step on board." A few passengers whispered to one another, One recognized her. Another discreetly snapped a photo. That photo would later go viral, not because she was a billionaire's wife, but because of the caption beneath it. She was once denied this very seat. Now, she's redefining what kindness means. At 30,000 feet. And that day, in the cabin, no one asked, "Who is she?" Because the answer was already clear, not printed on a resume, but written in the way she made others feel seen, heard, and respected, without conditions. Sophia didn't rewrite the history of aviation. She didn't invent new technology, change federal policies, or stand under spotlights on a TED Talk stage. But she did something quieter and perhaps even more powerful. She changed how the small people felt when they stepped onto a plane, that they deserved to be welcomed without needing a reason. From the front row to the back aisle, from crew members to everyday passengers, people began to feel something different. Not because Sophia was everywhere, but because of the culture. She reignited an old, resilient kind of culture kindness, without having to prove yourself, respect without having to earn it. One day, a 10-year-old boy in shorts, flip-flops, and holding an economy boarding pass stepped onto the plane. He spotted Sophia jotting notes at the back of the cabin, tilted his head, and asked, "Are you the one who made the flight attendants smile at us before asking where we sit?" Sophia laughed. "No, sweetheart. I just reminded them. Sometimes the ones in the last row need the smile the most." The boy nodded and turned away. But just before he slipped into his row, he whispered so quietly, and yet Sophia heard every word, "You didn't change the world, but you changed the way I walk into it." And maybe that was all she ever truly wanted. If you've ever been judged by how you look for worn-out clothes, for speaking differently, for not fitting into someone else's idea of who you should be, then maybe Sophia's story is part of your story too. She didn't enter the cabin with spotlight or status. She walked in with one quiet belief that she was worthy, even if no one else said it out loud. And sometimes, you don't need the world to tell you that you belong. You just have to show up, with dignity, with kindness, and let the world adjust how it sees you. Because your worth isn't defined by where you sit. It's defined by how you treat those sitting beside you. If you've ever seen someone get dismissed because they weren't elegant enough, wealthy enough, or impressive enough, don't stay silent. Be the person who reminds the world that kindness is a choice, and respect should never be a reward. It should be the starting point. If this story made you cry, or even just pause for a second to see a stranger differently, share it. Not for the views, but so that someone out there, someone quiet, someone enduring, someone holding on to goodness in the face of judgment, has one more reason to keep going. Because maybe next time they step into a cold boardroom, a judgmental cabin, or a space full of eyes that size them up, they'll remember. Someone stood there once, and she stood tall. If you've ever walked into a room, an office, or a first-class cabin and felt like you didn't belong, just because you weren't wearing the right clothes, didn't have the right look, or didn't perform the right version of yourself, remember this: you are enough, even when no one says it, even when the room whispers otherwise, even when your seat feels like a spotlight. Then maybe Sophia Carter's story is a part of your story too. She didn't need to shout her title. She didn't need to prove her power. She simply stood there with a valid ticket, with her true identity, and with an unwavering belief that she would not allow herself to be turned into someone who doesn't belong just because others couldn't see beyond appearances. And because she didn't speak with power, but stood silent with dignity, an entire system was forced to change. This story isn't just about a woman denied a seat. It's about everyone who's ever been denied a place to stand even when they fully deserved it. If you've ever witnessed injustice, if you've ever felt your throat tighten watching someone be humiliated just for being different, don't look away. Be the first to smile. Be the first to ask, "How can I help you?" And most importantly, be the one who speaks up. Not to start a fight, but to remind the world, kindness should never require conditions. Respect is not a reward, it's the starting point of a civilized world. If this story moved you, share it. Not to boost views, but so that someone out there quietly enduring can find one more reason to believe they are not invisible and they are not alone.